Sten, we're live.
And that's the enthusiastic voice once again of Larry, the Liberty guy, who we just don't see enough on the show. You know, he keeps teasing me and telling me he's going to start doing his own segments. Would love to do it. Love to do it. It's how Jesse Waters got his thing. What was his Man on the Street, Waters World thing? I mean, there's nothing better than Larry, Liberty guy. All right. Hey, welcome in the Dugout. I'm your host, Mike Stenhouse. Look, couple of interesting discussions today. First, in my commentary coming up in just a moment, lawmakers take an unexpected, bold first step to challenge the governor's mandates. I didn't think it would happen. It's a first step. We'll see what happens. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Our special guest segment coming up after my commentary, must see. If you're a worker, if you're a parent, if you're a student and you're potentially subjected to a vaccine mandate, you must see our guest today, Amy Gardner, Ann Armstrong, and they're going to talk about your religious rights, your legal rights, a seminar that's actually happening tonight. You can still have time to join in, so tune in just a few minutes for Amy and Ann. Tomorrow, very interesting guest, very interesting goings on in North Kingston. One of the towns where the school committee is openly pushing critical race theory in schools, and one school committee member in particular has upset students and parents and taxpayers alike. And now there's a student-initiated recall petition for that pro-critical race theory, some would say even Marxist school committee member in North Kingston. And we're going to talk with someone who's involved in a group leading that recall petition. So that will be tomorrow on In the Dugout. All right, before I get to the main commentary and our guests, let me put on my baseball, my Rhode Island cap today in the dugout, and just a few kind of national things. We know that, listen, Afghanistan, we've talked about that, not going to get into that. Has a little direct impact on Rhode Island in that Governor McKee has foolishly asked for just Afghan refugees to be sent here. Whether or not he understands that means there might be unvaccinated and unvetted people coming here, potential terrorists, potential Sharia law advocates. I don't know, but we'll see what happens with that. We may never know what happens with that. They do all this secretly, whether even Governor McKee knows whether or not we get Afghan refugees here. I don't know. And no, it's not a xenophobia against brown people. It's just practical common sense. We need people, we should have people in America, in our state, who love our country because of the principles it stands for, preferably who speak our language, but not necessarily, and who are properly vetted and who have gone through the proper immigration process. I mean, it's not hard. It's not xenophobia. Okay, so let's cut that. All right, but you know what's happened here. You've all heard of the infrastructure plan and the other trillions of dollars of spending that Biden wants to do. You know, there's a $3.5 trillion spending bill, basically, that would dramatically expand the welfare state. But according to the Congressional Budget Office and other people looking at the budget, there's no way Biden raises anything close to that amount of money that he's planning on spending. In fact, some estimates put it as low as half, that it doesn't even raise half as much. Now, remember Biden's promise to you, nobody under $400,000 is going to be taxed. That's not possible. And we're going to explain that in a second. So in order to, they still want to spend the 3.5 trillion. So that means they're going to have to raise more money, which means they're going to have to raise more taxes, which means you, me, and unless you make over $400,000, you're all of us are going to find all kinds of new taxes and fees out there in order to pay for Joe Biden's largesse. So they're scrambling to come up with a whole slate of new taxes. And here's what some of the things they're talking about are. A per mile car tax. Now, we would be okay, actually. I would be okay with replacing the gasoline tax, either at the federal level with a federal per mile car tax. After all, it's a user fee. should have to pay something for using the roads that the government builds. But it should be either in the form of a gas tax or in the form of a mile tax. Of course, the way that Joe Biden wants to do it, he wants both. Keep the gas tax, add a per mile car traveled or vehicle tax. No, we do not support that any way, shape, or form. He wants to tax unrealized capital gains. Now, you know what a capital gains is, right? Let's just keep it simple. Let's think of a big capital gains, your house. Let's say you bought a house 10 years ago when the market said your house was worth $300,000. Today, we have a hot market. The market might say your house is $400,000 worth market value. Now, you haven't cashed it in yet. You haven't sold it. You haven't realized that gain yet. It's a paper gain, right? It's unrealized. Joe Biden wants to tax you on that $100,000, apparently. That's the idea he's floating around Congress. Now, we know these markets go up and down. Who's going to put a value on that? Stocks you can have a value on, but still, you haven't cashed it in yet. Stocks like house prices can go up or down. Can you imagine the complication of a tax return? This year, my house is worth this much or this much. My stock that I still own is worth that much. And next year, now it's worth less, or next month. Folks, this is unenforceable. Realized gains, when you cash it in, that counts. Now, we don't believe that should be capital gains. We don't even believe that should be taxed. But if we're going to have a capital gains tax, because a low capital gains tax encourages investment. Invest in a house, invest in a business, invest in stocks, which is indirectly investing in the company. Invest, realize a gain. If we punish you for realizing a gain, there's going to be fewer people to invest, right? It's just common sense. It's the way the economy works. It's a social science. It's science. When you create a disincentive to do something, people will do less of it. It's that simple. That's not arguable. The left wants you to think that their policies defy the rules of science. They don't. Just like they think that people can change sexes by wishing it, by having a surgery, by taking some drugs. You can't. You don't. Okay. Anyway, taxes on oil and gas companies. They want to tax the companies, which means they'll pass on the cost to you, of course. If you're under $400,000, don't worry about it. Yeah, right. They want to double the size of the IRS. They want to tax what they call virgin plastics, raw plastics, before they're made into straws or plastic cups or whatever else, paper plates or plastic plates or whatever. They want to tax raw plastics, an excise tax, if you would. So that's going to, again, drive up the cost of all these products we use, either at restaurants or use in our own families. And they want to put a tax on carbon. Any carbon-based material. So that's going to mean double taxing of gasoline, of your heating oil, of natural gas you might use to heat your home or anything like that. We're going to tax it at the wholesale level. And then there's going to be a state tax on top of that. Folks, this is what drives up inflation. This is what drives down the value of your paycheck. And right now, in this country, the rate of inflation, the cost of living, is steeper, especially under Joe Biden, well, under Joe Biden, than the income increases. Even with all these employers, many employers having to increase wages because in order to compete with the government who's paying people for not working. Even though that's driving up incomes a little, the cost of living is going up faster. That did not happen under Trump. Under Trump, the cost of living was modest. The increased income was higher. So you were making money under President Trump. On average, you're losing money now under Joe Biden. Make sense? Okay, fair enough. But yet the White House still claiming that his tax and spend proposals aren't going to affect anybody under $400,000. You tell me, if you're making under $400,000, how you're going to escape a carbon tax, a mileage tax, an unrealized capital gains tax, a new tax on oil and gas companies. You tell me a plastics tax. How are you going to avoid anything in that? Okay, it's wrong. He said it. He might have been referring to income taxes, but income taxes are just part of the puzzle. You got to look at the whole tax scheme. We're all going to get taxed if the Democrats get their way. and Joe Biden. Speaking of which, also something that's been reversed since the Trump administration. And again, I'm going to put it less in terms of Trump versus Biden. I'm going to put it in terms of conservative economic policies versus liberal left economic policies. You probably know the very disappointing August jobs report. We added 250,000 new jobs. They were expecting 750,000 new jobs. That's a difference of 500,000. That's massive. That's a massive blow to our economy. But you know who was hurt most in this latest jobs report? Unfortunately, it was Black Americans. Black Americans saw their unemployment rate rise, which means fewer jobs for them. Why? Well, a lot of speculation on that, but that's, again, we're dealing with facts here. The Black unemployment rate went up. Overall unemployment rate down, which means the gap between the nation's unemployment rate and the Black unemployment rate went down. So just like we said earlier, now combine those two things. If you're a low-income family, your chances of getting work just went down under these liberal policies. Okay, that's what this report said. And if you do have a job, or whatever income you are receiving just became less in value because of the high inflation, the high cost of living, which would only get worse if the liberal left gets their big spending ways and has to impose all these taxes and fees that we just talked about. So not only are incomes and job opportunities going to be going down, and especially down for in the minority communities, but what your money you have will buy, your spending power, your buying power will also go down. So these are not good signs for America and whatnot. So, okay, now let's get on some pretty big Rhode Island news. And again, I want to give credit to this show and our organization, Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. A couple of weeks ago, we had on, you might recall, if you didn't see it, go to our video homepage, rifreedom.org/live. Oh, and by the way, while you're at it, go ahead and crunch that. Just crunch it with a good hard click, left click. Crunch that subscribe button while you're at it, okay? But you might remember a few weeks ago, we had on Judge Robert Flanders, Representative Charlene Lima, Democrat, Representative Brian Newberry, a Republican. And we discussed, and I didn't even know that the conversation would take this tone, but we discussed that they felt like the General Assembly should step in after sitting idle for 18 months, and now was finally the time to consider contravening some of the governor's executive orders, especially his most recent ones, which have all been based on what many feel is an unconstitutional redeclaration of a state of emergency. I'm going to play some of that footage from that interview a few weeks ago in just a minute, but let me give you the headline of what we learned today, and that was that I think it was 33 was the number. 33 members of the General Assembly signed a letter to the government. Well, I should say from the House of Representatives. 33 members of the House of Representatives. That's 33 out of 75. Signed a letter to the governor urging him to rescind the mandate for vaccine mandates on healthcare workers. Remember that mandate he issued some time ago, where he said that if you're a healthcare worker or you work in any industry that's involved in healthcare, all employees have to have a vaccine by October 1st, or else they could get fired. This is if you're a government employee. So, private companies are doing their own thing too. So a big debate ensued, less about what we're concerned about is just overall the rights of people to, if it's their body, it's their choice, but more so about the debate that ensued publicly. Well, you heard firefighters say the same thing. We heard nurses and other healthcare professionals say it, that we're not going to get the mandate. And if you're going to fire us, fire us. Now, that could lead to a massive shortage of frontline first responders, whether that's firefighters, police, healthcare workers. I consider a healthcare worker fighting COVID to sort of be a kind of first responder. And now a lot of groups are asking the governor, please reconsider. you know, we can't, we're already shorthanded. We can't lose another 10, 20% of our workforce because they don't want to comply with your crazy mandate. Do something about it. Well, now dozens of lawmakers in the Rhode Island House of Representatives have called on McKee to lift the vaccination mandate for healthcare workers. In fact, it was a bipartisan group that signed this letter. Again, 33 members of the 75-person House of Representatives signed this letter. And they're contesting state regulation enacted on August 17th that require all licensed healthcare workers and providers to be vaccinated against COVID by August 1st. I mean, October 1st, excuse me, October 1st. Healthcare groups have signed in, have weighed in, I should say, saying, listen, this is going to hurt our service. We're not going to be able to deliver services. I mean, the argument goes, would you rather have someone show up at your door to treat your broken leg or emergency in your home, or be pretty certain someone will show up? Or would you risk not having someone show up just to make sure that person was vaccinated? Now, listen, we know that some people are going to feel some way and other people are going to feel another way on this, right? We know that. But it's a legitimate debate, and it's a debate we should be having. And apparently these lawmakers have said, listen, we can't risk having healthcare people, providers not be available. We can't risk it. So please consider withdrawing or amending, I think, as they asked, the mandate. So I want to show you this. Going to come back to this later, but here's the Go Local Prov article on it. Now I'm going to come back to Go Local Prov in a minute, but here are dozens of lawmakers, legislators call for McKee to lift that mandate. And here's the list of them below. There's the 33. Pretty impressive group. Many of them in leadership, by the way. Many of them in leadership, Archie's leadership team. Arthur Corvasi, Representative Patricia Serpa, Representative Charlene Lima, who was on this show. You're going to hear from her shortly. At least my interview from a few weeks ago. Representative Anastasia Williams, Robert Craven is a member of leadership. I think Ray Hull even has some leadership position or chairmanship. So you had 24 Democrats, and you had 9 out of the 10 Republicans. All the Republicans except Barbara Ann Fenton Fung. Well, she's proven herself to be a real rhino. Some of you might like that, some might not. But she is not a member of the Republican caucus, even though she's Republican. She just doesn't agree. She's a healthcare worker. She's voted a lot on pro-union. She's taken pro-union stances, and this, as a healthcare worker herself, she believes the mandate should exist. That's her right, but it goes against the rest of the Republicans. So anyway, 33 have said that. The letter, interesting letter. I think they make a very interesting point here, that how throughout the pandemic, we praised and lauded the healthcare workers who, especially early on, without proper PPE, without vaccinations, were right there taking care of the sick and those infected. And the letter goes on to say, and let me requote, however, now some of those same heroes and saviors are facing the loss of employment due to state executive orders mandating COVID-19 vaccinations. While we strongly urge all adults to get vaccinated, we also believe none of our heroes should be in the unemployment line should they make the personal decision to decline vaccination. Fair point. What an irony. Here we are praising them, lauding them as recently as a few weeks ago and for most of the last 18 months, and now we're going to fire them if they made a personal decision. And that's a great point they make right now. All right, so let me play for you right now. And then I'm going to get to a final point in this letter, but I want to play for you some highlights from a few weeks ago. And again, remember, on this very show, now also remember, going back to 2020, over 15 months ago, 16 months ago, maybe longer, probably May. How many months ago was that? 16 months ago? 15? Our center was the first organization to publicly call for the General Assembly to get involved and to consider and debate whether or not they should end the unilaterally declared state of emergency, then by Governor Raimondo, which has now been extended potentially illegally a second time by Governor McKee. But anyway, that's besides the point. So our organization has been very consistent on this. So we interviewed on this show a few weeks ago Bob Flanders, the former Associate Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, Democrat leadership member, represents Deputy Speaker of the House, Charlene Lima, and former Republican caucus leader in the House, Brian Newberry. Here's a few excerpts from that show to set up the discussion. I'm going to stop and pause it a little bit to comment, but here's just a little setup that is so important that I'm going to comment on in just a minute.
I think it's important to remember that there should be restrictions on the governor's emergency power.
Hold on, I don't know if I shared that properly with the sound. Okay, here we go. Let me do that again.
And he ought not to be able to circumvent them simply by saying, well,
right.
This is a variant. And
Yep.
let's start again.
Yeah, great question, great point. Rep Newberry, did the governor just end run the General Assembly?
Yeah, here's what I think is happening. First of all, and you may not like this answer, but I thought about this. I think legally, any governor can declare a state of emergency anytime he wants to. Of course, it can be disingenuous and in bad faith and based on a false predicate, which so I think.
Now, in this case, that bad faith, he was under such pressure from teachers' unions, the Department of Health, to impose a school mask mandate, but he didn't have the authority anymore. Remember, the General Assembly ended his declared state of emergency in the budget that was signed into law by the governor himself on July 7th. So he no longer had the power to impose the mask mandate. So this is what Rep Newberry is talking about. He declared a new state of emergency based on the new Delta variant, which is a bogus legal argument, and it will be challenged, I'm pretty sure, for that disingenuous reason, just so he could relieve that political pressure on himself from the unions and his own Department of Health staff. Let's continue.
I think Governor McKee has done here. And of course, the General Assembly can convene at any time to remove that, which I think we should do right now. But I think what's really going on here is politics in the Democratic gubernatorial primary. It comes down to this. School mask mandates are a very controversial topic. People are split on them, okay? I was at a school committee in my own town last week. It was very heated on both sides. But among Democratic voters, according to polling, and just according to what I can see, just knowing people in my town, according to Democratic voters, they're very popular with Democratic voters. And Secretary Gorbea and Treasurer Magaziner, who everyone knows are both running for governor, and obviously McKee are running for governor, both came out and blasted him for not issuing a mandate for masks. So I think he issued this new state of emergency to give himself the power to issue a school mask mandate. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think.
All right, now I want to explain something else here. Now we are discussing vaccine mandates right now, and while this discussion is on school mask mandates, the vaccine mandate is only basically enabled because of the declaration of the state of emergency. Remember, there's a larger discussion here. Did Governor McKee have the legal authority to declare a new state of emergency in late August? From that came the school mask mandates, and from that came these vaccine worker mandates. All right, so even though we're talking here about school mask mandates, the same thing applies to these vaccines. All right, keep listening.
It's appropriate, but that's what's really going on.
And I would suspect I was under pressure. I got a little clunky with my sharing of my screen, so let me continue. From in kowtowing to teachers unions. Now, Representative Lima, you're a Democrat, you're in leadership. I believe it was Speaker Shikarchi basically said, look, we don't have to reconvene. We don't have to intervene. The governor has new emergency powers. And it sounded pretty much like he said, and we're not going to do anything about it. The governor has what powers he wants, and he can do whatever he wants. Now, that's not the spirit of what the General Assembly passed in June. Rep Newberry just basically said the General Assembly ought to reconvene. And I think after 30 more days, they could end this new declared state of emergency. Would you support Rep Lima, or do you think it's warranted for the General Assembly to get back involved and reclaim its rightful constitutional authority.
I absolutely would support that.
All right, absolutely would support that. Now, that didn't happen yet. All right. To support that, but they took a first step. Charlene Lima, the representative you see here, mostly from Cranston, Representative Newberry, the representative mostly from Burrillville area, I think a little North Smithfield, maybe Rep Lima has a little Johnston, if I'm not mistaken. Both signed the letter. And in the letter, here's what it said at the very last paragraph. If appropriate governmental action is not taken within the given time frame to protect these workers' jobs, and we're talking about healthcare workers under the vaccine mandate, we respectfully request Speaker Shikarchi to reconvene the Rhode Island House of Representatives. Exactly what we were talking about with Rep Lima, exactly the news that we broke on this very show. You saw it here first on In the Dugout. Democrats, Republicans, bipartisan effort to say, Governor McKee, you've gone too far. Stop it, or we're going to step in, as is our statutory right to do. The letter goes on, request that Speaker Shikarchi reconvene the House of Representatives in concert with the Rhode Island Senate to address this extreme and unjust mandate. Again, they're referring to the healthcare worker, healthcare industry vaccine mandate. The letter goes on to say, and moreover, to set parameters for any future state, municipal, and private sector mandates concerning the commerce of daily life in the era of COVID-19. Bingo, exactly what we've been calling for. Listen to us on this one. Well, I think what they're saying here in between the lines are, we're gonna step in and remove all your powers. All your emergency powers, and the General Assembly will be a co-equal player in this. Remember, the General Assembly has sat back for 18 months and done nothing. Well, the executive branch has run roughshod over constitutional rights, has run roughshod over our economy, has run roughshod over people's mental and emotional well-being. We know suicides and drug overdoses are up, and people are out of work, and people are depressed, and people are getting paid now. I mean, just a whole litany of things happen because of this governmental overreach. And the General Assembly sat back for 18 months and did nothing. But now that healthcare industry executives are complaining, now they're listening. They don't care about constitutional rights. Unfortunately, they don't. But healthcare employers, the big employers, the big hospitals and their ownership groups and other saying, we can't afford to lose more workers who don't comply with your mandate. The governor has not indicated he's going to listen to them. So now the General Assembly may step in. Now there is another course. Now, again, before I get to the other course, which is a legal course, General Assembly may step in. They've written a threatening letter. Governor, the threats are to two people. Governor, withdraw or amend this mandate, this vaccine mandate. Threat number one. Threat number two, Speaker Shikarchi. If he doesn't do it, we're going to start putting pressure on you to reconvene and get the entire General Assembly involved to contravene these orders. Very interesting. We will see where this leads. Now, there's already been a little crack in this. Let me just show you this headline, and then I'm going to get back to Go Local Prov. This just came out earlier this afternoon. According to the Providence Journal, that the governor is already maybe backtracking a bit. All right, we won't fire them as of October 1st. We'll give them an extra 75 days. Yeah, we'll suspend them. They won't be able to work. It's backtracking, folks. All right. Now, I think you're going to see continued backtracking. And hopefully you'll see a total slide from the governor on this and rescind the order, just like Rep Lima said. Let's go back to what Rep Lima says, just to think through her logic here, because her logic here is vital for you to understand. And she was right on in our interview 2 weeks ago.
I think that the position where, we got a virus that's going to continually mutate, that position is patently absurd, and it's trying to deceive the public. It's trying to pull the wool over the public's eyes. This is a new kind of a virus, a new mutation, so I have powers. Well, that can go on forever and ever. And what we're going to have is just one person doing whatever they want without any checks and balances from the General Assembly. So I think it's ridiculous, and I think we should go,
Wow.
I'm hoping the governor will realize that and pull that executive order. If not, I think we should go in and clarify.
Wow. All right. So that's big news. We have the Deputy Speaker of the House and Representative Charlene Lena. We have the former House Republican minority leader of their caucus, Rep. Newberry, both saying the General Assembly should step in and contravene the governor's new declared state of emergency. Judge Flanders, they have to wait 30 days, as I understand. So, before they could. So now you can see they haven't stepped in yet, but they've threatened to step in. This is big, folks. It's not normal for a party, General Assembly, Democrat in this case, to do something so publicly. This letter today by 33 lawmakers, 24 of which were Democrats, to so publicly challenge the governor of their same party. This is big news. This is, I think, a result of what happened on this show and by our center over the raising awareness, and by the Flanders Legal Center for Freedom. Judge Flanders, first one to bring up that the General Assembly has this constitutional right to intervene, and they didn't. So again, this is going to be fast moving. We're going to cover it every day for the next, for as long as there's new news on this. And again, I want to give ourselves a pat on the back. If you watch this show regularly, you are among the first to hear Rep. Lima say, I'm going to talk to the Speaker. The General Assembly needs to start stepping in, and they took their first step today. Now, I showed you the Go Local art. One other final comment before we reach our guests, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But I lost my train of thought. Oh no, Go Local Prov. So we showed you first the art. They're the ones that put out the first headline today in the news about this letter signed by 33 House members of the Rhode Island House of Representatives. Well, not an hour later or 2 hours later, look at this editorial posted in Go Local Prov. The same newspaper, hold on, did I share the right screen? The same newspaper that posted the story is now posting an op-ed ripping those lawmakers for signing that letter, calling them anti-business who want the pandemic to continue. What? What? First of all, the logic in this letter, I don't even know what to say. They claim they're ignoring science. It does say here these legislators have been silent for almost every aspect. That's true. But here they're saying that in mismanaging it, we need more mandates. Okay, so we've mismanaged it by putting on, in my view, too many mandates and things, but now Go Local Prov say we want more of them. They call it pandering. They're ripping these lawmakers for wanting to include a more democratic process in our state. Now, so two things. First, I want to give Go Local some credit on the one hand, but then I'm going to not give them credit on the other hand. So it's good that they published a story that they apparently, their opinion piece show they wildly disagree with this letter, but yet they published and ran the story. They're a news organization. At least they showed some responsibility here, and they published a story. But then they came back and they became part of the swamp. I mean, they've had this, they have this couple of these former scientists and former healthcare officials in this state constantly on their show, constantly pushing for more mask and vaccine mandates and lockdowns. I mean, they have been spreading the fear. Go Local Prov has as much as any news organization in this state, especially with the guests they've had on and the editorials by their staff. this is why there is so much fear, because the media like them, both in Rhode Island and across the nation, are just highlighting, you know, the pandemic, you know, the fear portion of it, and trying to cancel and criticize anyone who has a different narrative, like they're trying to cancel these 33 lawmakers who bravely signed this letter to the governor saying, end this healthcare industry vaccine mandate. So on the one hand, they did provide some objective news. On the other hand, their subjective commentary shows that they are just part of the larger media swamp that will do anything to support the status quo government in the end. They might criticize them here or there, but in the end, they're part of the swamp. They're part of the problem. To this we've come, folks. To this we've come. Claire Stoutmiller, if you're watching, thank you for your great aria, which you can find on oceanstatecurrent.com. Go to Arias for Freedom. It's one of the tabs right at the top. To this we've come, where a government is mandating, without any democratic process, without any judicial oversight, is mandating medical procedures for each of our bodies. Our jobs are at stake if we don't. To this we've come, and the media cheerleads it. Like Go Local Prop, cheerleads it. But let's bring it back to real life circumstances now. So we know that government workers, healthcare workers are facing this mandate, or else they could be fired by October 1st. We know that many college students are facing vaccine mandates. We know that many high school students are facing mask mandates. We don't have vaccine mandates there yet. But in fact, we're going to talk to, so the question is, do these workers, students, parents have any legal recourse when it comes to the heavy-handed vaccine mandates? This is an important question, or mask mandates. And joining me now are two ladies who are going to present different views on why it's important and how to execute a religious exemption to the governor's, at least for now, standing executive order requiring all healthcare workers to receive the COVID vaccine prior to October 1st. So I'd like to welcome Amy Gardner and Ann Armstrong to In the Dugout. Amy, Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Amy, let's start with you. You've been involved in similar fights. You were a director of the organization that our center got involved with many years ago, opposing the mandated HPV vaccine. We did battle with the Department of Health then, and it looks like we're back doing battle with the Department of Health again, right? Who I'm sure was behind this push with Governor McKee. Your thoughts on just tying the two together?
Well, it's just a continuous overreach of Rhode Island Department of Health. One way or another, they just snip it, anything that they can to have a control of pushing what they want you to do versus respecting your individual religious or parental rights.
Yeah, and I should mention that Amy is also the founder of healthchoiceri.org. Which we're going to get into some details of the employee rights seminar you're having in just a minute. And you have been on my show as well before. You are a leader of one of the Healing Church, Rhode Island, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Christian congregation in the world. And you're a two-time gubernatorial candidate for the Compassion Party and a mother of 7. Religious exemptions to these medical mandates, just in general, you've been fighting these as well for years. Why are they so important to have from a moral and spiritual point of view?
Well, these particular vaccines for Jews are not kosher because they were made with or tested using cells derived from aborted babies whose cells were cloned. This is not kosher for Jews. Now, the Jewish laws of kosher talk about how important it is to, even if you're going to eat
Yep.
an animal, kill it with mercy and
Yeah,
compassion.
okay, got it.
Babies were torn
All right,
apart.
how about from the more Christian point of view? Why is it important?
Point of view, any association with abortion is repugnant and in and of itself is enough to reject these. But the Catholic Church, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to refer people,
Quickly,
respect for the person and scientific research, sections 2292 through 2298, talk about how there has to be informed consent. There can't be any coercion. There can't be any enticement. And actually, these particular stringent measures that have been taken violate all the precepts that were elucidated in the Nuremberg trials.
so you're saying that informed consent is not just a medical tenet, but a religious one as well.
Well, you don't know what's in that vaccine. You don't know what the long-term effects are, so you can't give informed consent.
Well, I know that, but are you saying it has a religious basis as well as a medical basis?
because-
Okay,
Fifth commandment forbids harm to the body.
Okay.
And so we're not allowed to use experimental medical treatments that we don't know what's going to
okay,
happen
got it.
to
Thank you.
children.
So Amy, your group is looking at this, and let's look at a photo here or an image of a webinar that's actually happening tonight at 7 p.m. and the public, there's still space, I assume, but tell us about this live employee rights seminar. Again, this is assuming, well, you should watch it tonight anyway, because I doubt that McKee is going to rescind his own executive order.
Yeah, it's
unless-
at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. It is available to anyone, even outside of Rhode Island, because this is federal law. This is not specific to Rhode Island. These are all employee rights for anybody that works for somebody with 15 or more employees. And we will discuss, what does the federal law say? How is it your rights, and how it's a protection? It's a civil rights protection of your employee rights, because you cannot be discriminated against based on your religious beliefs.
And who's the person conducting the webinar, Amy?
Alan Phillips has 20 years of legal experience, and specifically he has chosen to focus a good portion of his legal experience on this Title VII federal rights.
All right, so I assume your seminar will get into some actual legal documents that employees can use if they want to try to opt out and have an exemption accepted.
Yes, there will be resources delivered to the attendees after the seminar closes. Those resources can be purchased separately for $250. So it's an extremely valuable seminar to participate in.
And it could save you from getting fired, maybe, right? And just the morality of all this, the government telling people, we hear so much about my body, my choice on so many issues. But in this issue, the same people that promote that, my body and my choice, are ignoring that now. So just from a moral, the body is a temple of God kind of perspective, just talk about the egregiousness of the government trying to tell us what we can and can't do to our bodies.
Well, that's not their job. Their job is to protect our rights. The agreement we made when we signed the Constitution is, first and foremost, their job is to defend our rights to religious practice. But I do want to make—
Now, before we go on, that's such an important point. And so many lawmakers forget this, that the Constitution was developed to preserve the individual rights, not to that God and the Constitution have granted us. Instead, we find it time after time trampling on those rights because they think they know best, right?
Right. Now, these rights aren't absolute. You can't pollute upstream from a village and make those people drink the dirty water. And so as a collective, we've gotten together and decided how to balance rights and responsibilities when we live in close enough proximity to each other. I can't play loud music at 1 o'clock in the morning on my own property because the sound is going to go outside of my property. But when there's absolutely no unambiguous evidence that taking a medical treatment is going to do any good, when the tests are corrupt and suspect, you don't even know what's going on, and it becomes more and more apparent that they're kind of just making things up. Like in New South
Yeah.
Wales, been one death from coronavirus,
yeah.
and they're in total lockdown. They're
So-
using it as an excuse to take away our rights. They're making stuff up. It's like Munchausen by proxy, and we have an obligation to proclaim the truth.
Yeah,
If I
you got to get the word out, remind people what
I gotta-
government's all about. Now, Amy, is that really the basis for the legal objection? So you're advising people legally what they can do, and is coming at this from a more spiritual, religious point of view. But ultimately, this is about preservation of rights in the Constitution. Is that the basis for everything that your group is advocating for?
Yeah, well, not only is it your rights, but also hugely for informed consent. But this seminar will very specifically talk about your religious rights. So Anne is talking about how this, from her perspective, for those particular viewpoints, there is a religious objection. However, this seminar will discuss no matter what your personal objection is, it can very easily be considered a religious exemption. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read like 3 sentences
Yeah,
directly
go
from
ahead.
the
And they
government.
can go to employeerights.healthchoiceri.org to learn more. Again, this show's airing in the 4 to 5 p.m. slot today. The seminar is at 5:30. So if you want to get on, you got to hurry. All right. So go ahead,
Right.
read a couple lines and we'll get back to Ann.
These are directly from the government. Just protections apply, whether the religious belief or practice in question are common or non-traditional, and regardless of whether they are recognized by an organized religion. The test under Title VII definition of religion is whether the beliefs are the individual's own scheme of things, religion. Belief in God or gods is not necessary. That is the government way to define your federal religious protection.
What were you reading that from?
The EEOC.gov website.
So that's the official government equal employment opportunity website, basically supporting why exemptions are important, right?
Exactly.
So
And that you do have a Title VII right to file.
Right.
May I?
Go ahead, Ann.
I'd like to point out that there's a case called Cantwell versus Connecticut. It was a Supreme Court case in which it was declared precedent that you don't have to say what your religious beliefs are. They can't ask. It's against the law for them to ask, because the minute they ask, they start arguing with you. And all you have to say is, this is against my deeply personal held religious beliefs, period, short and sweet.
Right.
And
And like Amy read, you don't have to be part of an organized church or religious group. If you hold these very personal spiritual beliefs under the whole history of our country, that's been good enough. But now they're trying to say it's not enough. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, well, the Rhode Island Department of Health is trying to say that religious exemptions are not available. Well, by technicality of wording, they're not lying, because when you go through the Title VII federally, it's considered a religious accommodation. You are filing with your Human Resources Department. It's not terminology wise considered an exemption. So there's a little trick play in words there.
Huh. And what's been the history though? Have these, either one of you, have these religious exemption applications generally been granted, or is there some history of tyranny here where the government says, we're not going to be allowing that in this case?
Both. Some are having no problem being accepted, and some are getting a lot of challenges and denial. And those that do get denied can file with the EEOC.gov for discrimination.
And what have you seen historically about religious exemptions in general?
Well, from our point of view, we've never approached it from a statutory point of view. There's also a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, that's supposed to protect religious rights. But I don't like relying on statute because statutes can be changed. Our rights are inalienable from God and specified in the Constitution. So we've been involved in a number of other religious rights dialogues with the church with the state rather, regarding our sacraments, because the Catholic churches always use hashish from cannabis balsam in our sacraments, and they didn't know it, so they were arresting my guardians till we straightened them out. But the point is, any statutory approach can be changed by statute, and it implies that the rights are given to you by the government through statute. If this is being used to protect what we already have, that's fine, but we've always approached it from a constitutional point of view. The ayahuasca case, it's called UDV. People had a trainload of this dissociative hallucinogen called ayahuasca for their church, which they called the United Church of the Vegetable. And the federal government said it's theirs, they can have it. They gave it back, religious rights.
Religious, yeah.
It was either 8-1 or 0.
Okay.
And even in the Raich case, where April Raich was denied medical cannabis in California, Scalia wrote that if it were for a religious right, that would be different.
All right. So religion basically is a trump card in our Constitution. Amy, technically, your website and exemptions and seminar, is it just for religious exemptions, or does it talk about medical exemptions as well?
It does not really discuss medical exemptions much at all. I mean, we might touch upon it for a couple of minutes, but the primary purpose is what you can do through the EEOC, not just with the religious rights, but like how you can file.
All right, so it's really going to be a walkthrough, a checklist of how to do this. Now, the exemptions you're discussing, Amy, these aren't just for the healthcare workers, which is the topic of debate, which is the letter that was sent today. This would apply to employees at private, and that was a government mandate, right? The healthcare was a government mandate applying to healthcare workers. Would your seminar apply to people who just attend private industry, work for a private company outside of the healthcare industry?
Well, it's also for the healthcare industry. It's everything. Anyone that works for an employer with 15
a public or a private,
employees.
a public or a private employer.
Right. 15 or more employees.
All right, and we'll close with this. Does it make a difference to you whether the employee whose religious rights are being trampled on is a public or private employee? Would you say the same thing applies universally?
I would say that religious rights apply universally, and neither the federal government nor a private employer can discriminate against a person based on their religious beliefs. And so both of what Amy is talking about and what I'm talking about apply. However, there are two cases we have to think about: Smith versus employment and the Kim Davis
I
case.
probably don't have time for that, but just you're saying it does apply private or public.
It certainly does.
Okay, good. The last question goes to you, Amy, just very quickly as I show them your organization's website. Anything else you want to tell people relevant to these vaccine mandates that they can find on your website?
Well, you can see on the top right there, we have the original religious exemption form for the state of Rhode Island. That's kindergarten through college, and that's an automatic generated form.
And that's legally approved and accepted?
That's the Department of Health form. We just loaded it on our website for easy access.
And like you said, it's just an application. They don't have to accept it. It's just an accommodation, or is it?
No, this one is not an approval process. It's within Rhode Island's regulation laws that you just fill it out.
All right, so this one isn't necessarily for employees. This one's for students.
Right, that's the one that's for everybody.
Very important, because we know that's while the topic of this is employees, we also know parents and college students are facing the same thing for their kids and for themselves. All right, really great. I wish we had more time, but as this situation develops, let's talk about having you guys back on. You guys, you ladies, beautiful ladies, back on. Thank you for joining us for In the Dugout. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
So wrapping up this show, folks, to this we've come. Again, I'll say that again, where a state founded by Roger Williams in his quest for religious freedom, something he called soul liberty, that this spiritual independence is something that is part of our souls and was the basis for him founding the colony, I guess, at the time of Rhode Island, was the basis for our country's formation and the Constitution of our great country, the great Constitution of our great country. Religious freedom, freedom to worship as we so choose, the liberty to practice as we so choose, is now under direct threat because elites think they know best. As you heard our guests say, our government was expressly formed with the number one goal of preserving and protecting our God-given and constitutionally granted rights. Period. This government is doing anything but. At least the executive branch is. The legislative branch has sat idly by. Will they engage? Will there be a conflict? Will they reach some kind of an accord or compromise or agreement? Hard to say. Teachers' unions have a lot of influence. Department of Health in this state, nationally, have a lot of influence. But would freedom-loving citizens, at least somewhat freedom-loving General Assembly members who don't often act that way, but in this case, will they act, or is it really just more of practical? Hey, big healthcare companies don't like this, so we're going to step in. Is it a special interest ploy? I don't know, but will the General Assembly formally intercede here against the governor? Or will this letter lead to public pressure that will cause this governor to rescind his healthcare industry vaccine mandate? Now, remember, that's not enough for us. We need this governor to end that illegal, unconstitutional second declared state of emergency, which he did in late August, based on the quote, new Delta variant requires a new declared state of emergency. I can tell you that legal discussions are going on. People in this state are talking to big, powerful law entities out of this state. Whether they come together to actually file some legal action remains to be seen. But it's a very serious issue. And here's why it's a serious issue, because I think what Governor McKee did, he's the first governor in the country, as far as I know, to do this, to declare a second state of emergency by claiming that the Delta variant is a separate threat from the original COVID strain, and by basically end running his or her own General Assembly. I know people on the right do, well, let's put it this way, whichever way you agree on it, could be a precedent-setting case nationwide. If a governor, if it doesn't matter what the General Assembly says, and as Rep. Lima said, and Rep. Newberry said, if for any reason I can just declare a new state of emergency and grant myself unilateral emergency powers almost any time I want for almost any pretense, that's not a very good precedent that we want to see happen in this country. In my view, those who love centralized power would love that precedent, would love to see it that set. But either way, I think what's going on here in Rhode Island is going to be of national significance. It's not just a question of religious freedom. It's a question of the limits of governmental powers and executive overreach. It's going to be very interesting to see how the local scenario in here, Rhode Island, plays out and how the national scenario plays out. And will there be a need for a lawsuit? Will there be a lawsuit? Will the General Assembly letter work? I don't know, but we'll keep you posted. All right, tomorrow, remember, we've got a guest from Friends of North Kingston Schools, the group who's leading the recall effort against their pro-critical race theory school committee member. We'll tell you about that tomorrow. And we'll see you later on In the Dugout. Mike Stenhouse, see you next game.